When I was just a little boy, I used to like those shiny, pretty things. One day, I bought myself a prize. I bought it from a bubble gum machine. Then I ran home, calling my mama. Hey, mama, look at all the pretty things I got. My mama smiled, said, sit down, my child. She told me, oh boy, all that glitters ain't gold. It might fool you sometimes. That's a little something from the Spinners. The name of the song, thank you. I was really nervous about that because that second part, but anyway, I digress. The song of theirs called All That Glitters Ain't Gold. You might be familiar with the Spinners. You know, they had that little song called Rubber Band Man. If you're a big fan of, Marvel, Infinity War, you might have heard that little song when the Guardians of the Galaxy are seamlessly installed into that installment of the Marvel Universe and the whole Avengers saga. But anyway, yes, that is what I'm going to title this sermon today. Because, as our series bumper indicates, this gold leaf series we are currently in is inspired by the century-old Japanese practice of repairing broken pottery. And they basically take gold leaf, and use it to join the pieces of broken pottery and, make it something that is unique, something that is new, something that is beautiful. The scars and the cracks of the broken ceramic become the focal point. Instead of it being this thing that's broken, it's this thing that's considered beautiful. But as the legendary soul and rhythm blues group of the 70s, the Spinners sang, all that glitters ain't gold. In the first book of Kings in the Old Testament of the Bible, we are told a number of stories about or involving King Ahab. King Ahab was the one who was king when there's that infamous showdown between Elijah and the prophets of Baal. But this is another story that happens after that, where King Ahab seeks to make a vegetable garden, or perhaps a vineyard near his home. Now, most of the kings who are chronicled in Kings and Chronicles were erecting idols, waging wars, and leading the nation of Israel astray. So it might seem kind of refreshing, especially considering when we're first introduced to King Ahab, that here is a king wanting to create a vegetable garden or vineyard. Except there was one obstacle. The land where King Ahab wanted to plant a garden or create a vineyard was being occupied by a man named Naboth, who already had a vineyard in that very plot of land. And picking up in 1 Kings chapter 21, here's how the story goes. Sometime later, there was an incident involving a vineyard belonging to Naboth the Jezreelite. The vineyard was in Jezreel, close to the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. Ahab said to Naboth, let me have your vineyard to use for a vegetable garden, since it is close to my palace. In exchange, I will give you a better vineyard. If you prefer, I'll pay you whatever it's worth. But Naboth replied, the Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my ancestors. So Ahab went home, sullen and angry, because Naboth the Jezreelite had said, I will not give you the inheritance of my ancestors. He lay on his bed, sulking, and refused to eat. I hope you heal. His wife Jezebel came in and asked him, why are you so sullen? Why won't you eat? He answered her, because I said to Naboth the Jezreelite, sell me your vineyard, or if you prefer, I will give you another vineyard in its place. But he said, I will not give you my vineyard. Jezebel, his wife, said, "Is this how you act as king over Israel? Get up and eat. Cheer up. I'll get you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite." So she wrote letters in Ahab's name, placed a seal on them, and sent them to the elders and the nobles who lived in Naboth's city with him. In those letters she wrote, "Proclaim a day of fasting and seat Naboth in a prominent place among the people. But seat 2 scoundrels opposite him and have them bring charges that he has cursed both God and king. Then take him out and stone him to death." So the elders and the nobles who lived in Naboth's city did as Jezebel directed in the letters she had written to them. They proclaimed a fast and seated Naboth in a prominent place among the people. Then 2 scoundrels came and sat opposite him and brought charges against Naboth before the people, saying, "Naboth has cursed God and king." So they took him outside the city and stoned him to death. Then they sent word to Jezebel, "Naboth has been stoned to death." As soon as Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned to death, she said to Ahab, "Get up and take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite that he refused to sell you. He is no longer alive, but dead." When Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, he got up and went down to take possession of Naboth's vineyard. This is one of those places where in some churches they would say, "This is the word of the Lord," which just seems weird after you read a story like that. But it is in the Bible. And, a lot of times there's comments made about how the Bible is outdated. It's kind of archaic. That in particular, the Old Testament is out of touch, problematic, or largely irrelevant. But y'all, that story right there, that story of a king using his power and privilege to take something that doesn't belong to him, in particular, take the land and the inheritance of a far less powerful man, that story is pretty timeless. That story has relevance. That story hits close to home. That story sounds a lot like something that has happened, is happening, and will continue to happen if we continue to allow ourselves to be distracted by that which glitters. I usually don't watch the local news, but I just happened to come across a story this week, and it's taking place in Pineville. And the story is, in essence, a group of people in this neighborhood in Pineville have all received these mysterious letters letting them know that the ownership group that owns the homes that many of them are renting, many of them that have rented for decades, even generations, is under new management. And the management has given them 30 days to move. Lord knows what's going to happen with those homes, what might be put in its place. But the reality is we have an entire neighborhood of people who have been residents, who have created memories, who have raised families, who, contrary to what sometimes is put out there, paid their rent on time, who are about to be evicted from their homes. The news investigative team looked at the address for this company that sent these letters, and it leads to a vacant lot. So whomever the management group is remains under investigation, if you will. That story, in a lot of ways, is very similar to that one we find in 1 Kings chapter 21. But instead, You replace a king with corporations and banks. You could replace Naboth with low-income families, typically but not always families of color, that have been living in or renting the same house for sometimes 2 and 3 generations. You could replace Naboth's vineyard with a modest house. Instead of an offer directly from the king, it's letters in the mail and persistent phone calls offering to buy your home for cash, even offering to pay all fees, repairs, and closing costs sight unseen. Instead of a conniving, wicked queen promising to give you the vineyard, it's city planners, developers, local businesses, local politicians with promises of urban renewal. Subbing in for the 2 scoundrels would be perhaps landlords who are eager for a big payday. Instead of being stoned to death, it's an individual or whole family being displaced and either having to move to a completely different town or becoming homeless. It's part of a bigger problem that is going on in many parts of our country, but it's happening in our state as well. And in particular happening in the Triad area, but also Charlotte, in the area that many of us who have learned about some of the history and some of the inequality in our city would call the Crescent, the area where the median household income is the lowest, that the disparity between it and the wedge is somewhere in the range of $50,000 to almost $60,000, where the schools are not as good, there's a higher crime rate, like all these different things are interrelated. And oftentimes people will say, well, hey, the development that's happening in this city, it's got to be a good thing, right? We're going in and we're filling in the cracks. We're taking something that's broken and repairing it and making it beautiful. And look at all the businesses and, things that are coming into these neighborhoods that have largely been abandoned. But not everything that glitters is gold. It's really easy to point the finger at the phenomenon that we often refer to as gentrification, which is just really a fancy way of saying displacement. But the root of it in Charlotte in particular actually doesn't go as far back necessarily as the 70s and the 80s. It really actually goes back to the Great Recession we had in 2009, where a lot of homes went under foreclosure. A lot of homes were left vacant and abandoned. And part of the solution at the time was, well, what if these banks and these corporations bought up these homes? It would prevent the property value in that neighborhood, which was already in decline, from falling even further. And maybe prevent in Charlotte happening what happened in Detroit, Michigan, where you could get a house for cheaper than you could get a new car. And I ain't even talking about like a fancy new car. I'm talking like $20,000 to $25,000. So originally, that was the solution. And the thinking was that these corporations and these banks, once things had stabilized, would then sell these homes as single-family use. But that hasn't happened. They've held on to those homes. And in the state of North Carolina, there are about approximately 40,000 homes where this is the case. Now, 40,000 homes, when you're talking about the whole state of North Carolina, is a drop in the bucket. But the reality is the vast majority of those homes are in predominantly historically black neighborhoods in the Triad and Charlotte, where this is happening. Many of you know that I work full-time for a nonprofit called Urban Promise Charlotte. Our vision is to reach a child, raise leader, restore community. I feel like I'm going into a promo, but roll with it. We reach children by running an after-school and summer program for kids in under-resourced neighborhoods of Charlotte. We raise leaders by using local high school students to run the after-school and summer program. And our hope and dream is that those young people who literally lead our camps and our after-school program will go on to either higher education or certified trade, where they can then come back and help restore community, specifically in Charlotte. And so the site that I'm at is on the west side, right on Freedom Drive, in the historical Camp Green neighborhood. And our numbers for the number of kids that we have coming to our after-school and summer program is dropping. It has dropped. And it's dropped because this is happening in the neighborhood that I have the privilege of working in and serving. That you go back behind into the neighborhoods behind our site at the Movement Center, and you will see homes, including homes that some of my kids live in, that aren't more than 1,000 square feet. And all around them are being erected these beautiful Charleston-inspired homes. And what that's done is let people who own the various different homes around there know that a payday is coming if they're willing to sell their home. Sell the home that they own that somebody else is living in, which then displaces the families that have lived there for generations. And it's not like they can just pick up and move into any number of the apartment buildings that are being erected in the city of Charlotte. It's getting to the point that hypothetically, if things don't slow down, if things don't stop, it might not be next year. It's definitely not going to be next year. Probably won't even be 5 years from now. But maybe it's 10 years from now. The Urban Promise Charlotte West site will functionally be in Gastonia. Now, I got nothing against Gastonia, but like the last thing they produced that was like really great was James Worthy. But in reality, you are talking about a lot of people, in particular people of color, having to go out to Gastonia, having to go out to Concord, where what's to prevent the same thing from happening, not only to those people of color, but also people in rural areas that surround there, when those areas start getting developed. All that glitters is not gold. Something has to change. Something has to be done. This is on the local level. This is on the federal level. And I'll be honest, I am only really just now starting to learn more about this issue. So personally, I don't have like this really tangible solution that I can provide you this morning. What I would say is start learning. Start learning about it, the history of this, not only in our country, but specifically in our city. There are organizations, and if I had planned ahead better, I would have seen if we could have gotten somebody from QC Family Tree to come up here and talk about this. Because like someone like Greg Jarrell is way more educated in this area and speaks to this issue a lot more than me. But it's gonna take people coming together to continue to protect the most vulnerable, but at its essence, start believing that repairing, doing a gold leaf process, so to speak, on some of the areas of our city should not result in people being displaced and made homeless. It should not necessarily result in people involuntarily having to uproot their entire lives and take it to an entirely different place. So now I'm going to make a slight hard shift. And at the same time attempt to connect two different things. What I've just talked about and what I'm going to talk about next. As you guys know, last weekend we had the shooting in Buffalo, New York, where it wasn't until early Sunday morning or maybe even later on that afternoon that many of us discovered that the motivation of this shooter, who is a self-described white supremacist, went specifically 200 miles away from his own home into a neighborhood that he had done the research ahead of time to find out that it was a 1% white neighborhood, it was majority black, went in there literally to hunt black people. And he was killed 10 people, injured a few more. And his motivation was this, or fear, if you will, was this subset within white supremacist ideology of the Great Replacement theory. Whereas this fear that people of color are in essence going to replace people who are deemed white. And so that's what really motivated him. And it's really easy to look at that, look at what happened in California and the attack at a Taiwanese church, look at what happened in Dallas, in the Koreatown area of Dallas, where there was another shooter who was going around trying to kill or basically hunt people who they felt didn't belong there. And bear with me here, but the connection between the housing and something as wild and as tragic and just absolutely disgusting as what that young man did last week, the common thread is this idea of replacement. Whether it's displacing people or killing people, the connection is this idea that these people are basically not necessary, not needed, that we can just displace them and get rid of them and make this place better without them being here. I know that might sound like a little bit of a stretch, but there's a real issue that goes beyond just what happened in Buffalo, what happened out in California, what happened in Dallas, where we are just swimming in a culture full of all these examples where people of color are under attack. And I know I feel like a broken record talking about it. So I'm sure some of you might be sitting here saying, really? Again, Cedric? Yeah, again, I'm tired. I am so freaking tired. This is the fourth time in the last 4 years where a shooter has basically said or avowed themselves with this replacement theory. But it also takes me back to Charlottesville, West Virginia. People marching there. And you remember what they were saying as they marched with their tiki torches? They will not replace us. I appreciate this community because quite honestly, this is one of the few church communities where I can feel safe. And even speaking about this, where I'm not made to feel like I have to assimilate into the construct of whiteness, that I can be my full self. And so I say this to a room of people who I know care about and are passionate about this issue. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. What we really, really need is for there to be a movement where folks deemed white continue the hard work of divesting of whiteness. That construct that was meant to divide people from various different cultures and ethnicities who brought all these beautiful things to the table of what they made of the earth. And whiteness has disconnected so many people who are deemed white from their cultural beauty, of their countries of origin. And for those of us, folks of color, whether we be black, whether we be Asian Pacific Islanders, whether we be Hispanic, in the midst of the fear, of the concern, let's just continue to do what we've always done and create beautiful things, live a life of joy, celebrating every moment of life and not taking it for granted. May we continue to be able to find not just the silver lining in life, but the gold in life as well, and make life golden even in the midst of such uncertainty and fear. Amen.